Hello everybody, Joanne here again. Today I'm going to show you how I piece very tiny pieces for paper piecing. In the background I can focus in on this. This is actually a name tag that I had made for a guild challenge a few years back, and on it is what used to be my tiniest quilt. I guess it still is, and I incorporated it into my name tag. I made this many years ago, testing to see how small I could or wanted to do paper piecing. One of the things that I wanted to show you was how tiny the stitches are that I selected on my sewing machine. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. I couldn't tell you at the moment what that setting was, but as you can see, it is super tiny stitching because I had the smallest pieces, such as these little windows on the cabin, that needed to stay there. And so that's what I had chose to do then. But all you need to do is, when you're choosing your stitch length to sew your tiny pieces, make sure you choose something that's going to keep those pieces together. So let's get to it. First, I'm going to show how I set up my pieces to sew. So here I have my little pattern that I'm going to paper piece. It's from Legit Quilts. I'm currently working on the Easy Rider quilt. So I arrange my fabrics and do my paper piecing in lots of different ways. Sometimes I'll cut the pieces of paper. Sometimes I'll do one piece of paper at a time from start to finish. Other times I will just cut out the fabric for a couple and sew them. It just depends how I feel that day, what I'm doing. So obviously here, I just felt like cutting out fabric, and of course this is very tiny. So what I do is I cut them out and I pin them on the little spots where they're supposed to go. Of course, when you take them off, they're quite wrinkled. So the first thing I do is I have to make sure that I don't lose track of the numbers on the paper piecing. So I have these little clips that I have made, and we have 3 pieces, so I have 1, 2, 3. So what I do is I just take off a pin, and this is piece number 1. I clip it. I'm going to iron it. Piece number 2, clip it. Make sure we don't lose track. And this one's so tiny, I had to piece it out into the paper because it wouldn't fit, and I wanted to make sure I could see the number when I was cutting. So this is number 3. One of the things I do when the paper or the pattern pieces are really tiny, I try not to trim too much around the paper so I have something to hold on to. There were other pieces here that I had cut off, but I've got something to hold on to. So that's why it looks kind of strange that way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my scoring tool, and I'm going to score the lines so that I can fold the paper and easily see where the lines are on the back side. I usually will score all the way out to wherever the paper is so that I can easily see and I don't have to guess where the line started and ended. You can see the folded lines here, or the scored line here. I will fold the paper on all the lines before I start to sew. I do this because it's a lot easier to score without fabric on the paper. And this is exactly the same as you would piece a large piece, but it's just to show you that you can do paper piecing no matter what size it is, and the only thing you really have to adjust for the teeny tiny papers is your stitch length. So now I'm going to iron my pieces. I don't want to work with oops, I dropped my paper. Just 1 second. Yeah, those little suckers can get lost. I've had a few fall in my garbage can, I tell ya. So right now I will just iron these little pieces. So they're nice and flat. And of course, we're going to start with piece number 1. We'll get this over here so you can see. Tonight I'm trying to move my camera in a decent place where you can see it. So as you can see, this is my number 1 piece, and I just have to make sure that it fits on here. It doesn't matter which way. It fits well here. It's covered on all sides. So I'm going to leave it there. I do use a little pin, and these are little tiny sharp pins. You can also use a very small applique pin. I have even smaller than this, but whatever it takes to get that paper to stay in place. I don't use the tiny applique pins unless I'm typically doing applique. And I usually will put my pin perpendicular to whatever line I'm going to sew next. So I'm just going to stick it in here, and you really should be very careful not to make the fabric buckle in any way when you put the pin in. So if the fabric was to buckle like this, I would change that. I keep the fabric flat, put the pin in, make sure it doesn't buckle, and the fabric's nice and flat. Then I will turn it around, and the first line I'm going to sew on is this one. I'm going to flip the fabric over. I do trim without a ruler. I've just been doing this for so many years, and I have a really set kind of what I think is my little skinny 1/4 inch, which I've been using for years. So now I'm going to lay the next piece of fabric down, which is going to be number 2. So I can see number 2 is right here when I fold the fabric, knowing that this, and actually one of the things you can do to make it just a wee bit easier is to score the outside of these here, just to see where number 2 ends, because these little pieces are very small. And when you have a bigger piece of paper to hang on to, it's easier to see where number 2 is supposed to be, not way out here. I can also see that number 3 is going to end right there. So you don't look at this line underneath, just where number 2 is going to end 1/4 inch past this scored line that I just made. So I will put the 2 down. And the really cool thing about Legit kits is if you use the double-sided fabric, the solids that they create the kits on, you never have to worry about which is the right side and wrong side of the fabric. And boy, these kits do take a while to make, so anything you can do to get them made faster without mistakes and not having to flip is okay in my books. So now I've put 2 down to line up with the line that I cut. And I check to see that it is all the way around for 2. I've got the 1/4 inch here. I can see it. I don't need it here. This is the end of the paper, and it covers everywhere. So now I'm just going to take it to the machine. I usually just slide it off my little deck there. I got a small light board. And let me see if this will work. Get you a good view here. Oops. One of the things that I do that's unusual is I use a walking foot just about for everything. It doesn't matter if I'm piecing a regular quilt, a paper piece quilt. This walking foot has just enough grab to grab fabric and paper, so it really keeps things in place. So I'm going to stitch. Need to lower the stitch. These are a little bit smaller. Everybody's machine is slightly different. I usually go down to about a 1.2. I'm going to slow down my machine. I'm a little bit of a Speedy Gonzales. So, and then I sew right up against the paper, just so you can see that. You can almost hear it kind of going through the paper, but it really isn't. I just go all the way to the end. It's going to get trimmed anyway. So I'm just going to take it back over here. And we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to trim it a little. Sometimes I use my scissors in the air, and I just want to make it nice and even. Then I literally will pick it up in my hands. There is a pin there, but I kind of hold it in place as I pick it up. I hope that shows. Oh, sorry. And then I flip it over and I give it a little iron. Doesn't matter if it shifts, it's piece number 1 and 2. Oops. And this is where little tiny pieces kind of need a little bit of manipulation because the fabric is so small that it just wants to go wherever it wants to go. So there, I have it flat, I flip it over. It is good. So that when I put it down, after it's been pressed, this seam allowance actually is like a little wall that I butt my paper up against. So the paper's right up against the seam, right on the threads are on the edge of the paper. So then I flip this over. I do, oops, gosh, I gotta make sure this is not, I slide it off my deck. You don't have to slide it off, it's just little tricks I've learned over the years to, gotta make sure I don't block this camera. I'm really sorry. I do put a little pin again, perpendicular to the next line that I'm going to sew, just like that. So now I'm going to flip it around because now I want to do piece 3. So I'm going to fold 3. Now there's a junction here. So I want to make sure that piece 1 and 2 and 3 all meet at that point. So I'm going to ensure that that point is exactly on the thread. Sometimes it takes, just a little, thread width to move it. I'm going to adjust that again because first I'm going to trim it. Oops. I'm going to put that back on the deck again. And you can see, although I have a little pointer here, that line right here is lined up with this seam. So the junction point will be right there for all 3 fabrics. So this is piece number 3. Piece number 3 is very tiny. You can see the scored line right here, the edge of the paper. This is a super tiny piece. I find them actually a little bit, sorry, I showed you the wrong side, sorry. Piece number 3 is over here. It's very tiny, and as you can see, you can't really tell where piece number 3 ends here. So that is why I will score it like I did for piece number 2 to see where piece number 3 ends. I don't really need to fold it on the score like I did with the others. I just want to see where piece number 3 goes. It goes right here. So I have to make sure that my piece number 3 covers this little area and a 1/4 inch beyond. So again, I have a nice big fat piece here. I'm going to flip it over. I'm going to lay this down on top, and it's kind of easy to see that this is definitely going to cover piece number 3 all the way around. I don't have to worry that, like I said, I really do find that the smaller pieces are actually much easier to do because you're using a much bigger piece of fabric, whereas we tend to trim the bigger pieces a little bit close to save fabric. I do have to say though that I am very impressed with Legit Quilts, that they give you plenty of fabric and you don't run out. I've never run out. And by the way, I'm not associated with Legits. I'm just showing you how I paper piece using one of their kits. So we're going to go right through this junction right there to make sure that, and can you see that nice and clear? Oh dear, that wasn't focused. This junction right here. So here's piece number 3 because I scored it. I know what it looks like. And I'm going to sew right up against the paper. Slide it off my deck. I'm going to put it into my machine. And I usually just sew right from one end to the other. I'm going pretty slow for you guys. I know that I've hit the junction right on. And I'll just keep going because whatever's at the end is going to get trimmed anyway. I go to the end because it helps. If I didn't go to the end, these 2 pieces would be flapping all over the place, and really want them to stay put. So now I'm not really needing to trim that because it's pretty even everywhere. So I'm just going to flip it over here and give it a nice little press. I just did a little quick finger press. There we go. And flip it back. And here, just to make sure that it's perfect, I will move that paper right here on that thread where it was sewn because it shifted a teeny micro bit when I was ironing. And I'm going to flip this paper over. Actually, I usually do it on the deck here so that, because now I just moved it again. There we go. I'm going to flip it over. Now it's in place. I'm just going to add another pin because these little tiny pieces, oh lordy, are quite the little suckers to keep in place there. Okay, no bulking, none of that. As I go around to trim, and let me see, I want to make sure I'm not in the way of the camera. As I go around, when I get to an intersection where fabrics meet, I don't zoom my rotary cutter across. They're great. They do make cutting in that faster, but in this case, they're making my job more accurate, and it's not about speed. So take your time, just kind of ease over that bump ever so slowly. You can rotate it up, push it a little hard. Just go, make sure you get it nice and cleanly cut right where that intersection is, and then there's no bulk. If you cut it too fast, you might introduce distortion by maybe pushing the top and the bottom goes in the other direction. As I go around, sometimes I'll just push the pin out of the way. I'll do that for this instance. And then I will cut again. Spin it around. I've already got 2 pins here. I don't really need any pins in there now because the quilting now, the sewing is done. Here is going to be another junction. I can see it. If I flip it up, you can see just the little point of the paper where the perforation was is right on the seam. I do check every time. Any kind of movement or motion can put it out of order. So again, I can feel the resistance of more than one layer of fabric. So I take my time going through it and it's nice and clean. And again, I do the same thing on this side. I can feel the resistance. I take my time to get through it, and then to the end. And that's it. Usually I'll just keep one pin in there, save the others for later. And that's... Now, of course, when this goes into the quilt, this is going to be the actual piece that we're going to see in the quilt, which is pretty tiny, this little piece of white. So we're just going to do the same thing when we put it together in a quilt. Maybe I'll do a video of that too, so that we only see this little tiny piece. So I hope that helps. Makes the job a little easier, and enjoy. Cheers.